The girl stood on the bridge outside the fence, gripping the metal bars with frozen hands. Elliot drove by and, seeing this, shouted through the open window of his car to stop her from taking a rash step. The girl did not respond. Elliot braked sharply, jumped out of the car, and cautiously headed toward her. He tried to distract her with conversation, gave her his name, and persuaded her not to do anything stupid. Slowly approaching her, he tried not to scare her away. The girl seemed resolute, looking down and warning Elliot not to approach, for she had already made her decision and nothing could change it. A piercing December wind blew, snow fell, and the weather worsened on the bridge. Elliot noticed the girl was not wearing gloves, making it more difficult for her to hold onto the frosty bars with her cold, white hands. Trying to keep her from getting frightened, Elliot chattered nonsense. "Listen, do you like ice cream?" She answered quietly, "It doesn't matter anymore." "Oh, I like ice cream. I could eat a couple right now," Elliot continued, approaching cautiously. "Is the wind strong out there?" She repeated, "It doesn't matter anymore." "And how old are you?" Elliot, close to her, spoke softly. There were a couple of big steps to the girl, which Elliot swiftly overcame. He wrapped his arms around her, throwing her back against the bridge sidewalk with all his strength. They slumped together, and Elliot held her tightly. It's okay," he said quietly, stroking her head to calm her. The girl shook from the cold in her thin jacket. Tears flowed from her eyes. She tried to speak, but sobs choked her. A driver ran up, but Elliot gestured that they didn't need help. The passerby understood. He often drove on that bridge, and there had been a similar accident recently. But the woman could not be saved. He praised Elliot for his quick reaction and walked back to his car. The crowded onlookers gradually dispersed, while Elliot and the strange girl continued to sit on the bridge. She was silent and only said her name was Mary. Elliot shook the snow off her clothes and took her to his car. He opened the passenger door, put her on the seat, buckled her in, and immediately turned on the heating on full power. "You'll warm up quickly now." "Do you have somewhere to go?" asked Elliot. "No, I have nowhere to go," replied Mary calmly. "Well, then let's go to my place for now," smiled Elliot, and they drove off. They got there quickly. Elliot parked and helped Mary out of the car. The girl had not yet recovered from the shock and clearly did not understand what was happening to her. When Elliot opened the door of the apartment, his wife met them on the threshold. Grace was surprised that her husband was not alone. She started to ask questions, and Elliot briefly explained that the girl had tried to jump off the bridge and he had saved her in time. The man asked his wife to help the frozen girl take a bath and left the bathroom. Grace helped Mary take off her sweater, climb into the hot bath, and asked how old she was. It turned out that the girl was only 18. Grace tried to find out from her what really made Mary do such a desperate act, but Elliot called his wife and said it was better not to bother her with questions until she came to her senses. Elliot sat in the kitchen and greedily ate the sandwich his wife had prepared. Grace tried to get details of what had happened, but Elliot only told what he knew. He was driving from his client and saw a girl who was about to jump off a bridge and decided he could save her. Grace sighed wearily. She was very worried, waiting for her husband from work, calling him, not understanding why he was delayed. Elliot hugged his wife and said he just wanted to help the poor girl who had nowhere to go at all. Grace looked at him, smiled, and went to get some clothes for Mary. Meanwhile, Elliot found some honey on the shelf, got milk from the fridge, and prepared a hot remedy for cold, according to his grandmother's recipe. Meanwhile, Grace had made a bed for the girl in their son Zach's room because they decided to put the boy in their bedroom for the time being. Grace went into the bathroom with clean clothes and saw Mary lying with her eyes closed. She touched the girl's shoulder and she jumped up in fright. Grace realized that something very serious had really happened to the girl since she was so scared. Grace gave her a warm sports suit and said that they were waiting for her in the kitchen. When Mary came in, Elliot offered her a cup of hot milk with honey, which she drank without enthusiasm. She refused to have dinner, so Elliot accompanied her to the nursery and told her not to be shy, and if she needed anything she should feel free to call on him or Grace. The next morning, Mary woke up to someone touching her hair. She opened her eyes and saw that in front of her sat a boy about 4 years old, who was stroking her hair. The child, with childlike sincerity, arranged a real interrogation of the girl, who she was, why she was here, whether she would always sleep in his room, and whether she wanted to play with him. Mary sat down on the bed and smiled guiltily, explaining to the boy that she was so sorry she had to take his room and that she would be leaving soon. Zach brought a huge plastic truck to the bed, trying to involve her in the game, and Mary did her best to play along. When Elliot and Grace looked into the room to check on Mary's well-being, they saw that the girl was sitting on the bed, looking at the baby car, and tears were streaming from her eyes. Mary looked up and apologized for the inconvenience she had caused them all. Grace decided to defuse the situation and dragged the girl into the kitchen for breakfast. At breakfast, Elliot and Grace tried to talk about anything to avoid going back to yesterday's events and the reasons that had pushed Mary to do this. But no matter what they talked about the weather or New Year's Eve traffic, there was a heavy silence every now and then. Mary ate a little, and it was obvious that her thoughts were still somewhere far away, and she could not hear how everyone around her was trying to distract her from her sad thoughts. It was New Year's Eve, and while Elliot switched his attention to his son, who took his father's dumbbell, Grace asked what he was planning to do today. Colleagues wrote in the chat that there are a lot of orders today. After all, it's New Year's Eve, so I'm going to go and work a little. Then he finished his tea, thought for a moment, and a great idea popped into his head. Elliot resolutely said that today Mary would go with him and help him. Then, before she could refuse, he said that she had 5 minutes to get ready and left the kitchen. Mary quickly got ready, they got into the car, and drove off. Elliot wanted to know what had made her take such a desperate step, but he knew it was better not to put pressure on her. She would tell him if she wanted to, so he turned on the radio to make the ride more fun. Elliot worked as a part-time courier, and today, having received the first order, they rushed to the first address. Mary looked ahead, and a million thoughts raced through her head, and the most important one, which did not give her peace, was why he saved her. Elliot parked the car, went out, and about 5 minutes later came back with a small envelope in his hands, received from a man in a strict business suit. He gave the envelope to Mary and jokingly appointed her guardian of parcels for the day. He'd also decided to involve the girl in his game, which he often amused when he had to drive around the city and deliver letters and parcels all day long. The essence of the game was that, having received an envelope or parcel and going to the delivery address, he should guess to whom it was intended and what the recipient was to the sender. And although it was not always possible to guess exactly, the process entertained Elliot very much. They stopped on the way to the store, and Elliot bought himself a Santa Claus hat and Mary a pixie hat. The girl put it on, automatically looked in the mirror, and for the first time smiled faintly. Elliot grinned merrily, satisfied with the achieved effect, and they headed to the delivery point of the first envelope. Elliot bet a tangerine with Mary that the envelope was intended for his mistress and asked what Mary thought about it. Mary sadly replied that she had no choice, and so she got the wife option. Elliot gave a sly squint and calmly told her, as he got out of the car, that there was always a choice. An elderly woman, who was obviously looking forward to this envelope, came out of the house to meet them. She happily babbled that it was time for her and her husband to fly away, and her son had bought them tickets and accidentally left them at his place. Elliot gave the woman the envelope, wished her a happy new year, and they went back to the car, realizing they both didn't guess. Elliot took a new order, and they rushed towards the new impression. At the next address, a pleasant lady with a cast leg opened the door for them. "I have packed presents for my granddaughters and my daughter and son-in-law, too." The woman began to show the boxes. "These boxes are for the girls. This one is for my son-in-law, and this package is for my daughter. Just be careful with this one, please. These are mittens made of mink. I don't want them to get wrinkled." "Don't consider it rude," added the woman when she handed over all her parcels. "My daughter left at my home a package of clothes, which she no longer needs, so I think it will fit your daughter. I know for a fact that there are a lot of new brand expensive clothes because my daughter is a big fashionista. I just need your help to bring it here." This woman's house looked like a palace with paintings and candelabra lamps hanging on the walls, Italian tiles on the floor, and a beautifully decorated fireplace in the hall. Elliot brought a huge bag of things. He handed Mary a bag of gifts, and he took the big, weighty bag with clothes himself. Then they said goodbye and went to give presents. It turned out that the recipients lived several streets ahead. The daughter and the son-in-law came out to meet them with indifferent faces. Elliot informed them that they had brought presents from their caring grandmother and passed packages of toys to the girls who came out from behind their parents. The two twins, about 6 years old, began immediately to tear the gift wrapping, but when they saw that there were dolls which they already had, they threw them on the floor and ran inside to the house crying. The father of the family indifferently took his gift, threw it on the dresser in the hallway, and silently left. When it came to the mink mittens, the woman squeamishly rolled her eyes and angrily said that she could hardly use them to go anywhere. Under her indignation that her mother had messed up and bought dolls from the wrong collection again, Elliot and Mary hastily said goodbye and quickly went to the car. Mary was sad. She understood that the elderly woman was so carefully choosing gifts, trying to make her family feel good, and in the end, her gifts, which must have cost a lot of money, were just thrown out like garbage. She couldn't get it out of her head. "Yes, Mary, that happens sometimes," Elliot stated disappointedly, "and we have to keep going." At the next address, a woman was passing a huge box of cake and was very worried that it would not get squashed on delivery. After promising that everything would be in the best shape, Elliot handed the cake to Mary, who was sitting in the car. The cake was so huge that the girl could not be seen behind it. Elliot assumed that even though they knew there was a cake in the box, they did not know yet to whom such a gigantic cake could be destined. Besides, the fact that they were asked not to say who the present was from added intrigue. When they arrived at the location, Mary helped carry the cake and Elliot rang the doorbell. Children's laughter and shouts were heard at the door, and Elliot quickly made the assumption that it must have been a cake for someone's birthday. A smiling woman opened the door, and behind her looked out 6 children of different ages. As it turned out, it was the twins' birthday, and they were celebrating it as a family. Elliot gave them a birthday cake, and the woman could not figure out who could have sent it. She thought her husband had ordered it and asked how much she owed, but Elliot loudly said that it was a gift. Elliot and Mary were about to leave, but the woman asked them to wait and ran to the kitchen. She brought them homemade gingerbread. It was obvious that they were baked with love of the whole family. The flowers and other decorations on top were clearly made by children. Elliot carefully took the package with the treat, and Mary suddenly excused herself and said that they had a bag of good things, and she would very much like to give them to this large and beautiful family. The older girls would quite fit something in their size. Elliot was very surprised and looked at Mary with his eyes wide open. When he came to his senses, he nodded. Mary asked him for the keys and ran down to the car to get the elderly woman's bag. While Elliot chatted with the woman and her children, Mary, out of breath, dragged a huge package into the apartment. "Here, happy birthday and happy new year," she exhaled. "All the best to you, "And thanks for the gingerbread," added Elliot, and they left the apartment. Mary was smiling. Elliot still could not hide his surprise and was very glad that she had thought of such a great idea with the things. After all, she could have worn them herself, but she felt that this family needed them more. Elliot decided to take advantage of the situation and ask Mary at least a little. He noticed that she did not use her phone at all, but the girl immediately stopped smiling and said in a chiseled voice that her mother was on a business trip, and she did not want to hear from anyone, so she turned off her phone. When he asked how soon her mother would be back, the girl assured Elliot that if he was worried, she would go to her grandmother in the village today, as she was not going back home anyway. Realizing that he had hit on a sore subject, Elliot suggested eating ice cream and then going shopping together, according to the list that Grace had sent him. They drove to the mall and left after an hour and a half, having bought all the necessary ingredients for the upcoming celebration. Elliot suggested that Mary meet the new year with them and then go to her grandmother's house. Mary doubted whether it would be convenient, but Elliot put those doubts to rest by saying that they were not expecting guests and that she would definitely have more fun with them. Elliot also found out that Mary had no money for a ticket to her grandmother, so he gave her some cash, explaining that it was her wages for today's day. Mary was very embarrassed but smiled and nodded in agreement. In the evening, Grace gave Mary one of her evening dresses. She and her husband also dressed up, and all in all, the inhabitants of the apartment looked like one big family. Ziak ran around the Christmas tree and urged Santa to come now, not when he fell asleep. Mary became much more talkative and laughed merrily while playing with Zach. Neither Grace nor Elliot could find out from the girl why she had been standing on the bridge ready to end her life. They knew nothing about Mary, but the girl had found out and understood a lot about them during those days. She understood that kindness is not about presents, but about love, care, and mutual respect. A family is not orders and instructions from parents, but about listening to each other. Before the chime of the clock, Mary took a picture with Elliot's family to memorize because at that moment she was a part of this family and she was happy about it. Before she left, Mary bought some small souvenirs for all the family members, and Elliot and Grace presented her with a warm scarf and hat and mittens. "May I call you?" shyly asked Mary. "I promise I will call rarely so as not to annoy you. I just really want all of you to always stay somewhere near me." "What a question. I'd say you even should call us." Grace gently tied Mary's scarf around her neck and hugged her. "Just promise it won't be calls from the bridge." "Grace," Elliot reproachfully said to his wife, "what are you saying?" "It's okay. Don't worry, I promise you that." "Thank you for everything," said Mary and hurriedly got into a cab. A year later, Mary sent Elliot's family a picture of her standing in the fluffy hat and scarf they had given her, among trees covered with the same fluffy snow. In the girl's hands was a poster with the inscription, "Thank you for the new life." Elliot and Grace put the photo on the shelf next to the pictures of Zach and joked to all the questions from their friends and acquaintances that it was their one more daughter. And only they themselves understood exactly what this young, smiling girl was saying to them from the photo.